Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I want to bring you another video on 3 more obscure plants that you guys will probably see while you're out and about foraging wild edibles. And in this video, we're just going to be talking about these plants' names and a little bit about what they look like. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now the plant that I'm holding right here in my hand is called the Asiatic Day Flower. There are a lot of dayflower species, and there are also a plant called spiderwort that will look very similar. All of these plants, dayflowers and spiderworts, are in the same family, and they have a lot of similar uses. The plant that we're looking at, Asiatic Day Flower, is an alien plant. It comes from Asia, hence its common name. This plant is invasive. However, I also have noticed that it doesn't necessarily overtake a lot of other plants in the area. So right now we're looking at the Asiatic Day Flower, and we can tell this in a couple of different ways. One, it has indigo colored flowers, petals, just like we can see right here. There are technically 3 petals on this flower, though you might be questioning, well Josh, there's only 2 that I can see. You're absolutely correct. There are 2 that we can see. However, if we look at the bottom, underneath of the stamens, which are these yellow flower looking things coming out of the center, we're going to notice this white or translucent clear flower petal at the very bottom. However, the top 2 petals are somewhat ear-shaped, or they're shaped a lot like a violet leaf without the cleft at the back. So these flower petals have a heart shape to them, and they are blue or purplish indigo in color. The stamens or pistils are extremely prominent on this plant, as we can notice here. If we look at the end of each one of these stamens, we're going to notice this yellow flower-looking thing coming out, and this is where the pollen is inside of the plant. This is how pollinators get inside of this plant and spread its pollen. This is one of the parts of this plant's reproductive strategy. So that is a good way to identify an Asiatic day flower. Some other really interesting features about the Asiatic day flower, if we look at the leaves and the stems, something that we're going to notice as we look down the stem, at each leaf petiole, there's going to be this little sheath running down the main stem of the dayflower plant. One of the reasons it has the name dayflower is because the plants will only bloom once out of the whole season. They bloom for one day and one day only. And there are usually a lot of plants because this is a colonizing plant. So whenever you find one, you're probably going to be finding a whole lot more. And if we continue down the stem, we're going to notice this alternating leaf pattern with these little sheaths everywhere there is a leaf node. So if we continue down the stem, we're going to notice this alternating leaf pattern going down the stem with this little bitty sheath right here at each one of the axils or each one of the leaf nodes. The leaves of Asiatic day flower have an oval or ovate shape to them. Some might even interpret them as lance-shaped, depending on the style of lance points that you're used to seeing. The leaf edges or the leaf margins are smooth, just like we can see on this species right here. You're going to notice one very prominent leaf vein running from the center all the way towards the very tip of the leaf, with the rest of the veins running very small but also parallel to this main vein in the center. This is an extremely easy plant to identify, and it's also very commonly found around homes, around barns, and even around gardens. I very rarely will see this plant in the wild, especially in native environments where there's a lot of native plants. However, it can be found there. Wherever you do find this plant, keep in mind that it is alien and it is an invasive plant. However, it doesn't always take over native flora, so that's something to keep in mind, that it may not always be destructive where you're at. If we look very closely at each one of the leaves on the Asiatic day flower, we're going to notice how they clasp the stem. These are clasping ovate-shaped leaves, and that's because they are stuck to the stem. There is no real leaf petiole or leaf stem that attaches them to the main stem of the plant. However, there is this sheath with this clasping leaf structure on this alternate growth form that we have. Now if we look right here, we're going to notice this old dead bloom, and that's because this flower blooms once every day. So an interesting thing to keep in mind is that just because you see a flower on the same day flower doesn't mean that it won't flower again. I have noticed that there will usually be multiple sets of flowers running up the plant that will continue to flower. This plant flowers anywhere from May all the way through October, and we are right now at about the first week of September where I'm at, and this plant is still in flower. Okay, now the next plant that we're going to be talking about today is called Chufa. This is a type of grass or a species of grass. Now Chufa is really interesting because it's now becoming extremely popular within health foods and within those who are wanting alternative foods and alternative medicines. This plant is extremely prolific in a lot of different states, and it's also grown commercially now for deer and turkey and also for human consumption. Another interesting name for the edible tuber of this plant is called the tigernut. Tigernut or chufa is used to make milk. It's extremely nutritious. It is chock full of calcium and vitamin D, and this is an extremely healthy plant if you do find it. It's very distinct, and right now this plant is in flower / seeding stage. So we can see these terminal spikes coming up here with all these unique little spikes, these brownish green spikes sticking out. They're radiating outwards in somewhat of a circle. We can also notice that there are branches here and here and here that allow these terminal clusters to produce. Chufa, being a species of grass, is very common, and there are multiple species of chufa or tigernut. This plant is really popular in Mexico and India and even some places in Europe, and it's starting to gain in popularity within the United States. Some stores like your Whole Foods and places like that will sell tiger nuts, not only as the nuts themselves, but also tiger nut milk. So if you find anything labeled tiger nut, this is the plant that they're gathering them from. This plant produces edible tubers, which are basically like small little potatoes. They're not really potatoes, but they are similar because a potato is a tuber. So this plant produces edible tubers that are within the ground, and the harvest time would generally be right before the very first frost. Another interesting feature about chufa or tigernut is the main stem of the plant. So let's take a look at the main stem of the plant and see what makes it so unique. Okay, so now that we've gone down to the main stem of the chufa, what makes it so unique? The fact that it is triangular in shape. It's not square and it's not round. It's not ribbed or anything. It is a triangle in shape. Okay, after taking another chufa stem that's growing here on my property, I have quite a bit of it here. Anywhere you find chufa, you're probably going to be finding a lot of it. However, if we take one of the stems and cut them in a cross section, and we look at that cross section like we are now, we're going to notice this triangular shape. This is unique to chufa, and I don't know of any other plant in the United States that has a triangular stem. There might be other plants with triangular stems that I'm just not aware of, so make sure you keep that in mind. However, this shows you guys that it does have a triangular stem, and this is a good way to identify chufa grass. The leaves of chufa are a yellowish green, and they will generally grow on opposite sides after the plant has come to its stem in its flowering stage, like we see with this plant right here. The leaves are very long and grass-like. Like I said, they're a yellowish green, and they will also have this deep channel or canal running through the main center, which is one of the main veins of the leaves. Now you guys might remember that triangular shape of the main stem, and what's interesting also about chufa is not only does its flower stem or seed stem have that triangular shape, the main base of the grass or the plant is very stiff, and it's also triangular in shape, just like we can see on this chufa right here in front of us. Another one of the nice things about chufa, especially this time of year, is how it's very easily discernible from everything else because of that distinct flower and seed spike that it produces. This plant is usually easily noticed from a distance because of this distinct spike that it has. Okay, now the third and final plant that we're going to be talking about today is called clearweed. Now this plant is very easily confused with nettle, and a lot of people will call it a false nettle. However, it isn't the true false nettle. It is related to nettles, and it is in the nettle family. However, it is not an Urtica species because it does not contain urticating hairs. As we can tell by the top of the leaves, they do look very similar to wood nettle and stinging nettle. However, it is not a nettle plant. It is in the nettle family and a nettle species, but it does not contain any of those urticating or stinging hairs like the rest of the nettles. The leaves of clearweed are broad and ovate with very, very strong teeth running along. Bleh. The leaves of clearweed are very broad and ovate. They come to a very fine point or a tip, just like we can see here by my thumb. The edges or the margins of the leaf are very, very sharply toothed, like we can see following the edges of the margins of all these leaves here. The teeth along the margins of these leaves is very easily discerned from the rest of the surrounding vegetation because of how sharp and how distinct they really are. We're also going to notice three main parallel running veins from the petiole all the way down to the tip or the very termination of the leaf, with all these different little veins running across. And this is how the plant will transport its nutrients from the soil up into the leaves for its photosynthesis and for its growth. Clearweed gets its name from its clear and translucent appearance to the main stem of the plant. And this is also interesting because this plant is not only translucent, but it's extremely juicy throughout the main stem. This plant is not poisonous in any way. It is edible. However, it does not taste near as good as wood nettle or stinging nettle. Its leaves will grow in an opposite pattern all the way up the stem, just like we can see here. And in each one of the axils or the leaf nodes, we're going to notice more leaves coming out. And we're also going to notice anther, A-N-T-H-E-R, anther-like flowers coming out of these axils or out of the leaf nodes. This is a really good way to determine whether you have a clearweed just simply by looking at the stem. You're also going to notice, as we can see here, this groove running up, or this channel or canal running up the main stem of the plant. However, see how below and above we don't see that channel. If we turn the plant over, we're going to notice that channel on the opposite side. This channel will generally change sides of the stem as we go from leaf node to leaf node. And then once you get further and further down towards the bottom of the plant, you're going to notice that channel becomes somewhat absent. But as we get further up the plant, that channel will become more and more distinct, and it will alternate on sides of the stem. So the groove or the channel running up the main stem of clearweed is alternate, whereas the leaves are opposite. On this plant right here, you guys might notice these little white specks. This has nothing to do with the plant itself, except for the fact that this is a species of aphid. For some reason, I have aphids growing along this clearweed and along several of the others. I guess this plant is really sweet, so that way the aphids are able to get a lot of sweet sucrose and glucose to allow them to produce their honeydew. This is not a main feature of this plant, however, it is something to keep in mind because I generally do find aphids on clearweed. So if you have a garden and you don't want aphids and you find this plant, make sure you do get rid of it so you don't have aphids spreading to your domestic crops, because that would be horrendous and cause you a lot of problems as you're trying to grow. If we look at another clearweed plant in my yard that doesn't have aphids on it, you're going to notice this very thick green foliage coming out of the axils of the plant. And that's because this plant has green flowers, and this is normally the time of year this plant flowers. They do not look like normal flowers, however, they look somewhat fern or evergreen-like. You know, kind of like an evergreen tree, like a juniper or a cedar. However, this is not an evergreen plant in any way, and it's not an evergreen-related plant. Clearweed will often grow in big patches and colonies. As we can see right here, there are a whole lot of clearweed plants right here. We have some white snakeroot off to the side, and there's even some lobelia and flata growing within this. These clearweeds generally like more moist environments. They're growing right on the edge of my house where rain comes off of the roof, which provides them all the water that they need to survive. If we look at the top from the leaves, we're also going to notice they're very shiny, whereas your nettle plants, your true nettles, your true stinging nettles, or wood nettles, will be very dull, and they'll also have urticating hairs and fuzz along the leaves. Whereas clearweed does not. You can see these leaves are almost shiny and glossy in appearance. And this is another way that you can determine whether you're looking at clearweed or a true stinging nettle species. So there's 3 even more obscure plants you guys might see while you're out foraging wild edibles. And what's interesting about all of these plants is all of these plants are actually edible and somewhat medicinal. Like I said, we're not talking about any of their uses today because that's not the subject of this video. But unlike some of the other obscure plant videos I've done, all of these plants are usable. I thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned just a little bit of something. If you want to learn more about wild edibles or medicinal plants, please make sure to subscribe.